I furnished it myself. I actually used, so when I knew I was going to be converting it into a short-term rental, it was also around the time where property values were starting to just creep up because interest rates were so low. And I was like, I'm going to do a cash out refinance. And so I did that to get the lower interest rate and then used that capital to furnish the entire unit and turn it into a short-term rental.
Welcome to Chai and Cabins, where we talk all things entrepreneurship, short-term rentals, real estate, and business. My name is Rashmi, like don't rush me, and it's my pleasure to welcome you onto this podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Chai and Cabins. Today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Brian. Brian and I are in a mastermind together, and the mastermind has completely changed my life. And I actually met Brian in Cabo when we had a retreat. He has an incredible story of how he scaled to 300, you heard that right, 300 timeshare units. And he's actually moving into development now where he's building out a property in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Has a really cool story, and I highly recommend you check it out. Have fun.
Rashmi.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
I'm good. It's good to see you after Cabo.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like it feels like Cabo wasn't that long ago, but at the same time, it feels like it was like a while ago.
I feel like you're in a completely different ambiance. Like I saw Bernie and a few of the other people because we're in the mastermind together. And you're also in Mike's mastermind, right?
I'm sorry?
You're in Mike Sjogren's mastermind?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I see everybody, but it's so different meeting everyone like in person and being like, hey.
It is. It is. It's so different. I've tried to be a little more active recently in the group. But yeah, and I joined a call last or maybe this week for the first time in a long time. I joined Ali and Kyle's call because I wanted to hear about the AirDNA updates because I was like, what happened to my AirDNA?
Gotta love the Airbnb life, right? I was freaking out. I joined Mike Riley's call and I was like, what is this? Where's my rentalizer? Why can't I find any of the Airbnb links? Like, what is happening?
Yeah, it's crazy. I hate the new update, honestly. I'm considering completely switching to Profit Maps, actually.
Is that John Bianchi's? Okay, I've heard really good things about his.
Yeah.
I just used Rabu right now because I don't know what else to. I haven't like picked an area yet to be like, this is good. That's fine.
Yeah. I kind of, and because I'm mainly like, I'm not really looking at individual like properties, it's not that big of a deal right now, but I do like having that access. And also like I help people and stuff. So like, I want to be able to pull good analysis and, share things with them. So
I love it. Awesome. Thanks for joining us here. I'm excited to interview you and talk about, I think, you have the coolest journey with timeshares and to get all into that.
No problem. Yeah, things have been so hectic. Honestly, this has been like a crazy week, and I'm like trying to wrap everything up because I leave Sunday to go to Vegas to Verbo's Explore Fest. So,
what? Look at you! I love it. Are you going to be at VRA next month?
I'm trying to go. I have so much travel next month too. I'm just like I'm trying to be really choosy, but so. The meetup company that I started with Ali and Kyle. Did I tell you about that when we were in Cabo?
I had no idea. Tell me.
Okay, so they posted about it in the short-term rental secrets group, but we went back in March at STR WealthCon. I actually met them for the first time in person because just like you were saying, you see people in the group all the time. And I didn't even realize they only lived like 30 minutes away from me in Atlanta. And I was like, what in the world? So I told them, I was like, I'm trying to start a meetup in Atlanta because I'm tired of going to these big conferences and then coming back home and being like, I wish I was around all those people again. So I was like, well, let's just create that community here. And they were like, all right, let's do it. So we partnered together and like literally like 3 or 4 weeks after STR WealthCon, we started the first one and we've been hosting them every single month. Wow. And they started to pick up a good amount of traction. So we were like, oh, this is awesome. And some people in the mastermind kind of started to notice, as well as some other people just in the space. And we're like, hey, we're interested in starting our own meetups. Like, can we hop on a call and maybe you guys tell us the structure and like how you guys are running this and marketing it? And when I was in New York, I was visiting. Are you familiar? Do you know Ruben Kanya?
I've heard of him. Is he on Instagram?
Yeah, he's the real
Okay.
estate experiment
I
is his
feel like
Instagram.
I think I either follow him or I've heard of him.
Okay, so he's really big in the MTR space and works with Rachel on the MTR Insurance Network.
Mhm.
But he and I were really good friends. I've known him for like a long time before he even got into like MTRs. And I was visiting him, and he used to run a multifamily meetup in New York, and he's moving now to Boston. He was like, "We're starting up, or I'm going to start my meetup back up." And I was like, "Well, what do you think about just launching it under our brand, and we could just have multiple locations? That way, both of us could benefit, and we could share off of building like a community of people who want to host meetups." And he was like, "That's a good idea." And so I brought it back to Allie and Kyle, and they were like, "Well, people have been asking about that." So then when I was in Cabo, actually, the very first day, I was talking with Maddie from Mount, and they're trying to foster in-person communities to help kind of increase Mount's awareness and customer base. And she was like, "We would love to partner with you guys on this." And so we partnered with Mount to help us, and actually Mike and Short-Term Rental Secrets has partnered with us as well. And so they sponsor our meetup, and they also have agreed to, we ended up creating a franchise model. So now it's, if you would like to host a meetup, we basically provide all the resources, the marketing, the structure, the templates. We can work with Mount, and they'll help you source your location and local sponsors and all of those things. And we'll handle all of the marketing, the socials, the Eventbrite, the ads, everything to help get people to the meetup. And we have a monthly, basically people sign up as like a monthly membership.
Mhm.
And Mike has agreed to sponsor half of the cost for all Short-Term Rental Secrets members who want to join. So after like we got all of this structure set up and had meetings with Mike and Mount and all of this stuff, now we had to start scrambling to like build out everything and like actually build an organization, because we were just like hosting a meetup as like people,
Right.
you know. So we had to like create an actual business partnership and like get a website and like all of this kind of stuff, create all of the agreements for the operators, the onboarding process, the onboarding manuals. So we've been scrambling over the last couple of weeks trying to do that so that we can start actually taking people on and launching in other states.
Mhm.
And we had a call last week with Anson, and he's going to be launching with us soon. Jen Lev from the mastermind as well. Chris Petsy has reached out and with some interest. And so we're hoping to have 5 or 6 locations across the country by the end of the year.
Who do you attract to the meetups? Is it real estate investors? Is it people looking to get started? Is it realtors and lenders and title people? Like
all of the above. So the main goal around the meetup is really just, of course, like networking, but we also are like educating and sharing resources. And we on the like, it's beneficial for like lenders and people who serve STR people, because of course there's tons of hosts who come to the meetups, and you get some people who are newbies. We've had tons of like really seasoned investors show up. Like one guy showed up to our meetup, and he actually helped me a ton because he's like a huge developer, owns like 60 something units here. He does hard money lending. He does like everything under the sun. And he hooked me up with his team to help on some of the development stuff that I'm doing. But yeah, I mean, it attracts everyone, but the real benefit is being that key person of interest when you're running it, because then like everybody associates you with all of the value that's created. So it just like my network has exploded since running the meetup here. And that's been the biggest value, honestly, to me.
I love it, because my business partner and I were literally talking about it. We had a huge meeting last Wednesday where we went over kind of like what our goals for next year is. Like we're big into planning and like going like, where are we going? What are we doing? Why are we doing all of this? That kind of stuff. And so that came up as a big topic for us, because no one in our little town really has real estate meetups.
Exactly.
No one's doing it. No one's talking about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, we should do this, but we don't know, like we just want to do it, but we don't know like what the next step is. Do I go create a Facebook event? Like, I don't know.
Right.
You mentioned this perfect time. Do you think it's important, because we're in vacation markets, do you think it's important that these happen in like bigger cities? So like I live like in between Austin and San Antonio, right? So would I host it in San Antonio, or do you think I can still host it in like my little town?
You probably can, but I do think that you're going to get, of course, more traction and more people to show up if you were to host it in a more populated area. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm sure you're probably more aware in your market how many operators there are and if there's like a bunch of Airbnbs in general, or short-term rentals.
A lot of Airbnbs. I just don't know if the owners live here or this is second vacation homes for them. Like all the ones we manage, of course, are all like second, third, fourth homes for them.
Yeah.
So they actually live in a different part, and then they have this, so they wouldn't be able to attend.
Yeah, I probably would try to be closer to a metro market. Because similar, like you're saying, like most people don't live in the vacation markets; they just invest in them, and then there's not really a whole lot of like residents in those markets.
Yeah, we'll definitely chat more about this because we're super interested. Like, and I was like, we've got to do something. Like, we get asked, and the other thing is, I don't know if you feel this way. Is I feel like I'm always answering the same questions over and over and over again. And I'm like, if somebody just like, if all of you just came into one room, I could just explain this one time.
No, that was part of it too, because I have people reach out all the time, and people like, I'm sure you run into this, right? Like people know what you do, and then they just think that they can pick your brain, or you're just like a fountain of knowledge for them. And so now I'm just like, oh yes, we can definitely talk. I host a meetup every month. Come to my meetup, and I use that as like the time. So I just tell everyone, if they want to have a conversation, if they want to learn anything, whatever it may be, show up to my meetup. We teach everything. It's for 3 hours. We'll do live deal analysis. We'll show you how to find deals. We'll help you. There's people who can help you get started, like everything top to bottom. They're like, okay, and that's brought a bunch of people to the meetup.
And then do you live stream the talking part of the meetup?
No, we only do it in person. And honestly, I want it that way. I wanted this to be an offline community purposefully, because similar to what you were saying, I recognize that within specifically our industry, there's like a ton of online communities, and because most of the things blew up during COVID, like that's when most people started investing in short-term rentals, and so most things were done online. So there's really aren't a lot of people running short-term rental meetups, because after like post-COVID, a lot of people have just been in their online communities, but there's not really a lot of people focusing on building in-person communities, which is why I thought this would be such a great idea.
I love it. We should talk more because I'm interested in getting some details. Should I just message you after we're done with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can schedule a call with me, Ali, and Kyle, and we can have a whole discovery call, answer any questions, and then if you're interested, you can join.
With Kyle tomorrow. I have a deal I'm looking at, and he was like, "I can help you," and I was like, "Okay."
Well, yeah, definitely bring it up to him. He'll probably light up when you say something.
I love it. This was like way off topic, but this is awesome. Like, this is what I love about our community. Like, you just jump on a call and you're already like, yeah, this is what I'm doing. And then now I have this business I didn't even think about. And now it's a whole business. But it's just like, there's so many extensions to short-term rentals. Like, people think like, I have to buy a property to be a short-term rental. But I'm like, no, there's so many other ways you can do it. Including in person or host a meetup, you know?
Yeah.
All right. So I always like to start off the podcast with, tell me a little bit about your portfolio. Like, what do you currently have? What are you working on?
Awesome. So right now I own and I have a management company where we primarily do timeshare arbitrage, and I'm focused on development of unique short-term rentals. So we're looking at building around 4 to 6 unique short-term rentals, primarily glass cabins is what we're really trying to focus on in mountain areas in North Georgia. And then on the timeshare arbitrage side, we work with resorts in 19 different states, Hawaii, Fiji, Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean, and have just around 300 units under management.
Wow. Okay, that is an incredible portfolio. How did you find short-term rentals? What got you started?
Interestingly enough, I was already investing in long-term rentals out of college. I went down the bigger pockets route, and one day got sent a podcast, Short-Term Rental Secrets, from Ruben. At the time, he was actually my realtor, Ruben Kanya, and he sent me that podcast. I remember listening to it, and I pulled over. I was driving. I was on a long drive, and I remember pulling over because of how excited I was. I was like, this is absolutely crazy. I'm changing my entire strategy. I thought it was going to take me a decade or more to reach my goals. But if I try out this short-term rental thing, I think I can reach them a lot faster. And that's what just made me go down the rabbit hole.
I love it. So most people, when they hear the first podcast, because I know exactly that moment when I heard the first podcast, and I was like, if this actually works, it could change
Right.
my life. But if it doesn't, then like whatever.
Right.
And I went like, I've got to buy a property, and like I just didn't know any other way to do it. What was your like first step into like what am I going to do next?
So I was already purchasing homes for long-term rentals. I was house hacking, which I still house hack today. And until I have a family, I'll probably house hack. I think it's the best way to live. um, and
Life, yeah, like you get your living expenses lowered while making some money. You get like two things.
Oh yeah, and mixing a short-term rental strategy with house hacking, it covers all of your expenses 9 times out of 10, and still puts a little bit of income in your pocket while you can live in the other unit. So
what do you do? Do you have rooms or do you have like a duplex? What do you?
Yep. It's a duplex, 2 separate units, upstairs and downstairs. I live in the downstairs unit, and then I Airbnb the upstairs unit, and it covers everything. And interestingly enough, it used to be a long-term rental. So I had long-term tenants for almost 2 years, and they were paying around $1,700, I think was their last lease. And once I converted it to a short-term rental, on average, it makes between like $400 and $4,500 a month. And so I was like, I'm sold. Like, that's it.
This is in Atlanta?
Yeah.
Wow, that is awesome. And then did you go out and furnish it yourself? Did you hire a designer? What was your design like setup process?
Yeah. I furnished it myself. I actually when I knew I was going to be converting it into a short-term rental, it was also around the time where property values were starting to just creep up because interest rates were so low. And I was like, I'm going to do a cash out refinance. And so I did that to get the lower interest rate, and then used that capital to furnish the entire unit and turn it into a short-term rental.
I love it. I love it. And that was your first venture into short-term rentals? That was your first deal?
That was the first owned short-term rental that I was able to convert. Yeah.
Gotcha. Let's talk timeshares. I've always been fascinated. I'm sure you get this all the time from everybody. Like, tell me everything. How did you find out about timeshares, and how to arbitrage timeshares?
So around the same time frame, I recognized if I wanted to get more short-term rentals, I was either going to have to do co-hosting or arbitrage, because I did not have the capital. And
can you just
I looked at
the difference between co-hosting and arbitrages? I'm not sure if people know exactly.
Absolutely. So co-hosting is when you don't own the property, but you do understand and know the processes of how to operate a short-term rental. So you typically go and find other property owners who maybe are operating their properties as a long-term rental, and you try to pitch them on converting that long-term rental to a short-term rental. And you want to provide them with the analysis and help them understand how you can help them increase their cash flow by letting you manage that property and turn it into a short-term rental. And I think it's one of the best ways to get started, especially if you don't have a lot of capital, because you don't have to have any, you just have to have the knowledge. And then on the arbitrage side, it's very similar, but sometimes owners aren't really willing to take that leap of faith or that risk on, just letting you turn their property into a short-term rental. They like that secure, steady money. And so they want you to sign a lease, so you have some sort of liability each month, whether that's, like if it's similar to like this property or the property I mentioned before, if it was like $1,700 a month, and as a short-term rental, it can make $400 to $4,500. You're like, okay, I'm willing to take on this lease, and I will arbitrage where I will cover the cost, but then the additional income over the cost of the lease will be my profit.
Awesome. Easy enough.
So, but the timeshare arbitrage side is actually a little different. So, I feel like it's important for people to understand like the landscape of timeshares, because most people, when they hear the word timeshare, they think like scammy or something that you want to get out of or stay away from at all cost, which is why there's a lot of opportunity in the timeshare space, because a lot of people don't want these assets. And that's what I view them as. They are genuinely assets, because what they do is allow you access to properties. And when you can get the right deed and structure it the right way with different resort networks that offer timeshare opportunities, you can have access to an abundance of properties. And then it's really on you to figure out how you can market all of these different properties in different markets to then sell to guests and allow them to come stay. The arbitrage side is done based on the cost of the units that you have access to. And each resort network, it varies. Some of them are on a points basis. Some of them are on a weeks basis, but they all translate back to cash in some way. And so there's multiple ways you can go about the timeshare arbitrage method. You can trade your points for people's cash. So if you have a very large deed with a large number of points, you can then reserve different units that you have access to with your points, and then basically sell those units to guests at a higher markup. And that's the arbitrage that you're going to make. And then some resort networks allow you to tap into what they call like bonus inventory or extra inventory, since within the timeshare space, a portion of all of the inventory within a timeshare resort is reserved only for owners in that timeshare network. So if you were not an owner in that timeshare network, you wouldn't be able to stay at some of these resorts, or you might only have access to like 10 to 15% of their inventory. So it might say it's sold out to you because you're not an owner, when in reality, there are empty rooms in that resort. And so if you are an owner and you have access to that extra inventory, you then can market and leverage that extra inventory to additional guests at a slight markup. But then again, you put your markup on top of it, and you're able to then put it on OTAs, direct booking sites, and start collecting bookings.
So easy.
It sounds easy, but I don't want people to think it is, because there's so many extra steps, but that's just the high level.
I can only imagine. That's why I was like, it sounds so easy, but you actually go to do it. There's a lot more steps involved in there. Yeah. So if I were like trying to arbitrage timeshares 101 over here, what would my first step be? Like, would I contact these companies that are handing out timeshares, or do I contact like a specific owner who has the timeshare? Who am I talking to?
So my recommendation, if you don't have someone who's already doing this, is to set up a timeshare presentation, because it's a very important to understand how the timeshare network that you want to operate in functions top to bottom. How their point system works, how their inventory works. And you want to have a list of questions when you go in there, because I look at it almost like an interview when you're going in there and talking to these different resort networks. And I've had meetings with just about every single timeshare resort network in the US. So I'm familiar with how they almost all work. And I went in there for research purposes, knowing that I wasn't necessarily going to purchase all of these, but just to better understand how they really function and operate. And once you have a really good idea of how they function and operate, you can make a good decision of who you want to work with, or who you might want to, arbitrage with, and how that might function. Since each network is so different, you have to literally go network by network to figure out which one you want to get started with. But I would say step one is really just gaining the base level information and setting up a presentation with one of the resort networks.
Okay, got it. Are there any like specific ones that you recommend? Like, are there different ones in America as opposed to, Cabo, right? Or in, I don't know, some other part of Europe? Or because I thought they were all worldwide. Is that not true?
So no, and once you really start diving into the realm of timeshares, you realize how many timeshare networks there are. There's a lot of really big players that most people are familiar with: your Wyndhams, your Marriott Vacation Clubs, your WorldMarks, your Hyatt Vacation Clubs, and those kinds of people. But there's also really small resort networks that maybe like within our mastermind. Actually, there was a member who found a very small like lodge, and I think they only had 1 or 2 locations, but they were operating it as under a timeshare model. Right. And so they can be at all different sizes and in all different locations, whether it's in the US, South Asia, Australia, Europe. But yeah, they can be in all different kinds of shapes and sizes. Most of the time, people are just familiar with the big players.
Really? Okay. And then if I talk to a big player in America, do they have the same process if they're in like Mexico, or is it different?
So the only international resort network, I've only spoken with one international resort network, and it was over the phone. And they did operate a little different, but at their core, most of them operate under a very similar model, because at the end, their timeshares essentially are fractional ownership. So they're building this large network, and then they're selling everyone fractional interest into that network. And sometimes it's by the individual resort, and sometimes it is by the entire resort network. But it depends on the type or structure of deed or agreement that you have with that specific resort network.
Got it. So say I set up a meeting with one of these timeshare networks. Do I just tell them I want to arbitrage some Airbnb units, or what are some questions you recommend asking?
That's great. So you probably don't want to go in there guns ablaze and say, hey, I want to put these on Airbnb. You do want to be a little more tactful in how you're asking those questions. Just like if you were kind of going to go into a multifamily apartment complex and try to arbitrage their units, right? You want to be very tactful in how you approach it. Some of the questions that you want to ask is, what are the policies that you guys have around unused owner inventory? Right. And if I had family or friends that I wanted to be able to benefit from the timeshare network or the timeshare that I'm about to purchase, how would they be able to benefit? Would it cost them additional money if I wanted to allow them to stay? Would I have to only use my points to allow them to stay? Or are there alternative options like paying cash to allow them to stay? These are the kinds of questions that you want to ask, because they're going to help you have a better understanding of how you're actually able to market and sell these units to not just your family and friends, but individuals on OTAs and your direct booking website.
Very cool. So on the ones that you can book with cash, right? Do you pre-book these rooms? So like, are you giving them your credit card information, pre-booking them, and then hoping it sells on Airbnb?
No. So it varies among networks, but for example, within our largest network, we have direct access into their system. So we can see availability on a consistent basis, and our team makes sure that our availability is aligned on a consistent basis. So if a booking comes through on Airbnb or VRBO, at that moment, once the booking comes in, we then secure the actual unit. So we're not covering the cost of that unit until the booking has been booked.
Okay. And then, so if you're waiting for the booking to come in, and then what if you book and then the guest cancels? Like say it's 30 days out outside your cancellation policy, or something happens. How do you guys work that?
So we align our cancellation policies with the cancellation policies of our resort networks. That way we don't run into any issues. And actually, occasionally, we'll actually make a profit when someone cancels, because we can occasionally get a better deal through the resort network than we can from, the structure of what we've already set up on the OTA or the policies within that OTA.
That's so cool. And then when you block it with the timeshare resort company, do you put the guest information on it, or is it your company's information that's on it?
We do. It's all the guests top to bottom, and it's a seamless experience for them. So they actually don't even know the difference. So when they show up to the unit, everything is under their name. It is just like if they were an owner showing up.
Okay, so they get access to everything.
Everything, all of the amenities, everything that's offered.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. What softwares do you guys use? Are you on like Owner Rez, Hostfully? Like, how do you guys manage? Because you have 300 units. That's a lot.
Yeah, so we use Owner Rez. We did meet with just about every single PMS system, and they were the most willing to kind of work with us in our model, because it's not the traditional ownership route. So there's not as many moving parts. We didn't need the abundance of tools that most of the PMSs have, right? We didn't need all of the additional aspects that something like a Guesty or a Hostaway has. So we wanted to work with someone who was willing to give us kind of a more streamlined, bare bones version of their property management management system that aligned with our structure. And Owner Rez did that for us.
Awesome. And then do you guys use Pricelabs as a tool for this, or are you only on Owner Rez?
Yes. So we use Pricelabs as well, but how we use it is a little different because we're in so many different areas and different markets. We have I call it almost like the secret sauce to the company, but we have a really big pricing spreadsheet with a ton of formulas that informs us how we should actually be inputting the pricing into Pricelabs for us to always remain profitable on our bookings, no matter what happens.
Wow. Okay. And that's your custom formula. You can build it with all
Yeah.
that. Love it. I love when people get into detail and they're like, I have this like whole proprietary thing that I do. And that's the way, because it's really hard to price these units, right? I mean, you're talking about converting reward points into cash, then into availability,
Right.
and into Pricelabs. And then Pricelabs just does its own thing.
Right. So the spreadsheet a formula that it essentially spits out is telling us what we need to be setting the base, the minimum, the weekend minimums, and the specific, like all of the other things around the specific resort network, because we have to align that formula with the pricing of the resort network, because they have different pricing, whether it's a weekday stay, whether it's a Friday, Saturday stay, whether it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday stay, all of these kinds of things. So all of that has to be taken into account depending on how a guest might book, so that we can ensure that we're going to get the profit that we need from the arbitrage standpoint.
That's awesome. And then, so if I as an owner went, and so two parts, I guess. The first part question is, if I went in as an owner and I was like, you know what, this year I'm not going to go to my timeshare, can I just contact you and be like, can you sell this for me and make some money for me?
Technically, yes. We did take on a few of those. We have before. But we try to stay away from that now, just because it creates an extra layer of liability sometimes. And depending on the level of comfort of that owner, it's a little tricky. But yes, that is something that you also can do.
Awesome. And then my other question is, say the resort, because you said you had access to their system, right? Say there's an owner block. Does it automatically update your Owner Rez iCal calendar, or is that a manual process? And how do you guys keep that in track?
So part of the updates we have part of them happen automatically and part of them are manual. And that's a back-end process that our team has to do as a part of their tasks every single day. Within reviewing our calendars and managing availability is a daily task, because it's a very important piece, of course, of how we can actually accept bookings.
Right. And then your team has to go in and manually input all the guest information onto the timeshare. Is that also a part of your daily checklist?
Yes. So when any bookings come in, they have to make sure that we extract all of their information and make sure we put all of their information into the system, so that when they show up at the resort is going to have all of that information.
Let's talk about your team. I know you have a killer. We've talked offline about that. Yeah, tell us about your team.
Yeah, so we have 4 full-time employees, and they all manage different areas within the business. They have kind of like primary areas, but then everyone is also kind of trained across the entire scope of the business. And within being in short-term rental secrets, of course, we're very big on SOPs and operations. So we have a very, very robust SOP library in the event that, someone needs to fill time for someone else. And then we do also hire some independent contractors every now and again for certain work or certain seasons in the event that things start to get too hectic.
So 4 people to manage 300 listings.
Mm-hmm.
That's
yeah.
That is so impressive. And your team is based here in the States?
No, they're based in the Philippines. Well, I do have a team member. They're primarily help with they're not on the operation side. So I do have a team member here in the States, but the majority of everyone on the operation side is in the Philippines.
Okay, so they're all virtual assistants and obviously do great work. I know everybody has a question, like at what point did you hire your first VA? And then any tips to hire the best VAs? And then the second part of that question is any tips on training really good VAs from what we could do to be better?
Yes. So I hired my first VA pretty early on when I started this company. I knew Fortunately, I had already been in the short-term rental space before I started the timeshare arbitrage. So I had an understanding already that I needed to like build out processes for people to follow behind me, since I knew I wouldn't be able to be like, if I wanted to continue to grow and scale the company, that they would have to help. And when I first started, I only had around 12 units, I think. And I was able to manage those 12 just myself. And then it got to a point where I was like, okay, I need to start figuring out how to, bring on a VA. And luckily, a good friend of mine had an agency, and he had a whole team of VAs. And so he shared some of his processes as to how he found his VAs. And I actually found my very first VA on onlinejobs.ph. Created a job posting, went through a whole interview process, and just kind of followed the blueprint that he gave me. And that, along with building out the SOPs and the processes, I was very intentional on the front end of making sure that he and I documented everything together on a day-to-day basis, and to really lay the foundation, knowing that we were going to be hiring more people very soon. And so I think something that happens a lot of time within this space is people they build really fast, and then they retroactively look back and are like, okay, now I need to come and get the help and do all of these things. And so one of the biggest tips I always try to give to people is try to set that foundation before you get started, and have that vision of where you want to go and who you might need to fulfill that vision, so that you can plan on the front end and build everything out with those people, because it makes your business run a lot smoother as you continue to grow. And that's essentially what we did. And we kind of knew at what points we wanted to hire more and more people. And so he and I scaled to around 60 something units. And then we brought on someone else. And then we scaled to in the 100s. And then we brought on another, and just so on and so forth. Until we got to around 300.
Awesome. So let's talk about SOPs. I think people hear that and they freak out. Like, I know operators who have like 3 units, and they're like, yeah, I'm just working on writing out my SOPs. And I'm like, what? I think people just hear the word and they're like, so like, oh my God, it's this huge task, right? And like when I hired my first VA, I literally like screen shared and I hit the record button, and I was like, let's go. Like, this is what I do. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of had my VA like write out the SOP. Like, this is the recording. This is what we do. This is how we do it. This is why we do it. Mm-hmm. How did you train? Because I think people just get so scared when they hear the word SOP, and they're like, it's going to take me forever to document.
Yeah. So I agree. I think a lot of times people are like weary about that process, but I think breaking it down into a very simple way of thinking about one task at a time. And that's really how I approached it. I was like, okay, these are all of the tasks that I do on a day-to-day basis to run this business. Let's first try to systematize and write down or record this one task, and then hand that task off. And if you kind of like look at it in that kind of way, I think it's a lot easier to digest. The way that we like to create, well, the way initially we created, because it's a little different today, we have new tools, but initially we just use Loom, and I would screen record myself doing the task and talking through the task. And then we also use Notion as our kind of like internal company directory. And that's where we house all of our SOPs. And you can embed your Loom video into a page in Notion. And then below that video, explain all of the steps that are being done in the video, so that we have both a video as well as the kind of instructions step by step.
And now Loom does that automatically. It's even better.
Right. Yeah. With AI and being all integrated, they give you a whole transcript. It's awesome. And you can also use things like Tango now, where they'll create the whole PDFs for you just by clicking and doing the process. So there's a lot of streamlined ways to create those SOPs, but that's initially how we did it. And just, like I said, process by process, to a point where now I look back and I'm like, I can't believe we have this many SOPs. Like, because I forget how to do stuff because I don't do it anymore. So I'm like, wait, how do we do that again? And I have to go back and watch an SOP.
I love it. And you do forget, like my team handles so much of what I do that I have no idea. So when people ask me, I'm like, I don't know, but I'll find the video. Then I'm sure it's recorded somewhere.
Right.
I'll send that to you, and you can watch it then, and then you can. So at this point, does your team kind of handle everything for you? How involved are you on the timeshare business?
Yeah, they pretty much handle everything. and it took a little bit to get to that point. But yeah, now I meet with the team around once a week, sometimes twice a week if needed. And then I have basically like a COO who really runs everything and kind of helps manage the rest of the team on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, awesome. Let's talk COO because that's not a position I've hired for. How was the hiring? Why did you feel like you needed one? What brought them on?
So he's actually the first employee.
Really? Okay.
Because he helped me build the company, he understands it almost, if probably better than me, truth be told, because he's closer to it on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, I think growing with him helped him because he got to see everything as well as us documenting all the processes. And now he creates SOPs and, for the rest of the team to view and to train them and those kinds of things. So it went from, him learning the business and the processes to now him teaching the business and the processes to other people.
Awesome. So is the plan to continue to grow the timeshare business?
It's not. So while
Really?
arbitrage is a great business, the ultimate goal for all of us, I feel like, in real estate is ownership. And the only problem with that business is you don't own those assets. You just have it's a cash flow business essentially. And so that's why my main goal moving forward and my main focus is development and owning very unique short-term rentals, which is where I see the market shifting to. And so I'm really trying to parlay all of the, profits and investments from that business into more ownership moving forward.
That's awesome. Tell us about your development in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Yeah, so it's been a very difficult journey thus far.
Really?
I've actually had 2 different deals fall through on the development side, but still moving forward, still pushing. Ultimately, when Airbnb did their change towards the back end of 2022, I kind of started really taking a seat and being like, do I just want to buy another short-term rental? Or what else would I want to do? At that time, midterm rentals were also taking off, and I was kind of trying to figure out what's happening in the market, where are things going? And Airbnb was very upfront in saying, hey, we think that the future of short-term rental stays is experiential stays, unique stays. And they showed that to us by creating all of the categories and marketing that whole OMG category and the A-frames and the tree houses. And after kind of digging into those types of properties from a data standpoint, I realized just how much of an outlier they were from an income to cost standpoint.
Really?
And so I was like, okay, this is where I ultimately want to focus. And I joined 2 different development masterminds, one centered around land hacking and one centered around building unique short-term rentals, and have just kind of been really trying to learn that space. So I still consider myself a student in that space. It's not something that I've mastered just yet. There's a lot of information around, first just purchasing land, doing due diligence on land, understanding covenants, restrictions, county rules, utilities. I mean, just all types of new information that can make or break a deal. And within the first deal that I had, that deal ended up falling through because of the way that we needed to subdivide the property for the cleared build sites that were already on the land. It would not get approved for the county rules within how far septic needs to be from the county lines, how much road frontage it needs to be per parcel, and a few other just kind of like red tape regulatory type of issues. So we wouldn't actually be able to execute on the vision of the development because of those rules. So we weren't going to get the type of returns that we were projecting. So the deal didn't make sense anymore. And then the second deal, which I was very, very excited about, ultimately came down to an easement, which is something that we had to learn a lot about. But we had a corporate neighbor who we found out owned around 400 acres of land in the area that we were looking at. And a very small sliver of what they owned was the best way to access the land that we were purchasing. But because the other side of that land did have road frontage, it was just extremely steep. It would have cost thousands upon thousands of dollars to try to cut in to drive up this extremely steep mountain ridge. We needed the easement access for the best way for guests to have access to that parcel. And I had to play a little bit of FBI to find the owner of this large investment company and reach out to them very diligently to see if they would be willing to even review our easement proposal. And luckily we were able to, and we had to extend our due diligence almost an additional 30 to 45 days because they had to have multiple people come together and set up a meeting to see if they were going to grant this easement proposal. And they ultimately denied our proposal. So we weren't able to then proceed with that development because we won't have legal rights to bring the utilities and pave the road because we technically don't own it.
Gotcha. Okay. So all of this happens in the due diligence period. So is it typically longer than a traditional buying a house due diligence period?
On the development side, yeah, I would say you could expect to have a longer due diligence, especially if you want to get your ducks in a row. Because there's a lot of things that are hyper local specific when it comes to trying to do a development. Talking with your county, for example, I have a GC that I'm working with who's very familiar with the area that we're trying to build in. And he gave me a list of things that I would have never considered, like understanding Mountain Protection Act, because we're building in the mountain areas. We need to make sure that whatever parcel we buy doesn't have any protected areas or protected trees that we can't cut down or clear so that we can get, the right views and have the right, topography and area for the development. And if you don't figure things like that out in the due diligence phase and you end up buying the land, then you realize you can't execute. Now you have to turn around and sell the land. So.
Right. And we're a big problem.
Right.
That's crazy. So you had two deals that didn't work out. And deals like that, especially like in a due diligence period, are you kind of fronting the costs? Like you're having contractors come out, you maybe have to talk to architects, maybe not even architects at this point, but like land surveyors, engineers.
Yes.
And so like how do you kind of budget for that? Do you raise money? How does that process work?
So when it's in the due diligence phase, a lot of that is your just costs that you're having to pay out of pocket. I have had, lost some funds to having surveys done, soil tests done. That's just kind of what I call the cost of admission to get into the game. But you learn, right? And I think I've learned a lot from both of those deals that ultimately has me more prepared moving forward, because now I feel a lot more confident in my blind spots and what I need to do to execute this next project. That's
awesome. So third time's the charm. You were able to close it.
That's right. Third time is the charm. We actually have, I don't want to jinx anything, but we have something coming. So we are working on the third one here. And hopefully we're able to get the ground running and actually start breaking ground this time. So
awesome. And then what do you plan on building? Are you building like a monstrous 8-bedroom, 9-bathroom house? Or are you going more tiny home style? What are you envisioning?
So we're focused on developing what I'd like to call micro resorts. And they're sweet. We want to stay under 10 units in whatever we end up, finalizing. But the ultimate goal is a minimum of around 4 for these micro resorts. And they're going to just be almost like these very high-end, luxury, unique short-term rentals. And we'll try to have a community type of experience. So some common areas where guests can come and hang out outside of just their units, some nice attraction where they can take a memorable picture, also for marketing purposes, whether it's something like those Nashville wings that everybody is familiar with, or, some other nice monument. But that's really what the ultimate goal is. And this first development is really kind of like a proof of concept. And ultimately, we're going to plan on doing more of these micro resorts in different markets, all under the same brand.
I love it. Have you heard of Isaac French?
I have not.
Okay, he has, let me just screen share here because I think you'll really like him. I follow him on Twitter. I'm a huge fan of everything that he does. But he has this deal in Waco and did exactly what you're talking about. But he was actually
Yes, I do know who you're talking about.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
He was able to refi out of it, and then his properties just provide infinite returns at this point.
Yes,
And,
that's the goal.
And he's very transparent on Twitter if you follow him. So he talks about like, this is how much I did in August, how much I did in, this month. And these were my costs. And this is what I do. And yeah, 7 units. And it's a beast. I think his net profit last year was $620K after everything was paid. It was
right.
Just insane.
Yeah. I mean, these developments definitely can knock it out of the park. But, just like we said, it's a lot more work. It's a lot more effort. But if you're able to execute on them, the risk to reward and the work to reward is definitely worth it.
That's awesome. How long do you expect this to take? Like from now until hosting your first guest?
It's hard because there's so many variables,
there's
right?
so many,
there's permitting, there's building issues, right? So, in an ideal world, in an ideal world, I would probably say late next summer to maybe early fall. But we'll see.
That's awesome. And then do you start sourcing your people? Like at what point in this journey would you start sourcing your people, like your cleaners, your handyman, your designer? Like would you wait till you're 75% there, or are you like starting already?
So I think when it comes to the people to help you execute the actual vision, you can start sourcing that early. You're going to want to, of course, source your GC very early, explain what you're trying to do, and work with a GC who is willing to execute on that vision and wants to work on that kind of project. Because what I do is I now bring my GC whenever we go to look at land, because he knows what I'm trying to do. And he has a very good understanding of if we can do it in a specific area or the extra hurdles that it might take to execute it on this property versus another property, or how it might affect our cost if we do it on this property versus another property. And then I would say an architect or a designer is very important to in terms of getting the plans and, getting them together with your GC so that you all can be on the same page of knowing what types of structures you're trying to build, the general cost of how what you want to stay within. And then you can bring in your designer as well at that point, once you have the idea of the type of structure, to get an idea of the interiors, the finishings, the furnishings, and those types of things that you might want to actually have in that unit.
That's awesome. And then do you have these design, like, do you show them samples to your GC, or have you just kind of talked about your vision and you guys have seen photos together? How does that work?
We all talk and collaborate on it together.
That is so cool. What about the development? Because it's very different from timeshares, right? Like, was it just like, hey, I can't buy an STR right now. It's not at the price points and it's not cash flowing as well. So I'm just going to go into development.
So yeah, I wanted to figure out where I could put capital to get the highest return. And ultimately, I found that to be within developing unique short-term rentals.
That is awesome. I love it. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, how can they reach out?
They can find me on Instagram and Facebook. At The Real Estate Hacker is my name on both. And then you can also visit my website, therealestatehacker.com, and you can schedule a call with me there.
Awesome. We'll have all the links down below as well. Thank you so much, Brad. It was so fun catching up with you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And keep me updated on, I'll call tomorrow too about the meetup stuff, but I'm super curious, super interested.
Absolutely. Honestly, I think you'd be a great meetup host. So it's really fun. Like, I love hosting these meetups. Like,
okay.
I'm not gonna lie. I feel most like amped up. After you do certain things, you just feel like alive. Yep. I feel so alive after those meetups, and it's like everybody's like, "Oh, this like," and then when like tons of people come and people are like, "Thank you so much for hosting this. This was so valuable," and like it just. Yeah, it can't be beat, honestly.
I love it. Okay, I think you've inspired me to go actually do it, because I've been talking about it forever. Yeah. But I think it's time to actually put some action to it and actually schedule it and get it done.
Absolutely. Well, we'd love to have you.
Thanks so much, Brad. Take care.
No problem. You too.
Bye.